Good evening from Vietnam, Sally. Thanks a lot for spending your morning to join our insight sharing and share your amazing stories with our global audience. And on behalf of the listeners around the world, we want to say thank you to you.
My pleasure. It's wonderful to be with you.
And Sally, you've been travel to so many countries and having leaders to get better, but Vietnam it's not on the list yet. All right, so please accept our invitation. The next time you travel to this region, make sure that you stop by our country, and we take you around town, show you how beautiful this country and the people here. Okay?
Thank you. I would love that. It's a place I've always wanted to go.
Your friend came here not once, many times already, so he should have a lot of good stories about our country for you to motivate you and inspire you to come. But I give you a little taste about our culture first. All right, so in our culture, it's very honor for our audience to have you to do a little introduction about who you are and the work you are doing. Would you please do that?
Of course I would. I'm Sally Helgesen, and I am an author and a speaker, and I do some leadership coaching. I have worked in countries all around the world. My primary fields have been women's leadership and inclusive leadership, which I was really the first to write about and brought that word, that language of inclusion into the world of organizations and business. So very proud of that. And I've watched extraordinary changes because I've been in these fields and actively working in them for 37 years or so. So it's been quite a journey, and I've watched amazing changes take place. So those changes are all part of my story.
So you have a phenomenal career. You have amazing people to get more amazing, all right? You introduced to us in less than 2 minutes, and it's not fair for our audience. So this conversation, we're gonna tangle together to unveil the story, okay? So allow us to travel time, shall we? Would you?
Of course.
All right. So when I was a little boy, I always wanted to become an astronaut. So wearing the suit and jumping different planets seems very cool, and I really enjoyed that idea. But life didn't give me any idea, any chance to do the thing that I wanted to do when I was a little boy. So for Sally, when she was a little girl, what was her dream about herself in the future, though?
I always had one dream, and that was to be a writer. That's how I saw myself as a little girl. It's what I did in high school and in college. And there was never really any other career path for me that I was that interested in. For a while, I wanted to be an actress, but standing up on stage and delivering programs, I get to do both. I get to perform, but drawing on my own work as a writer. So I brought those two together.
Beautiful. So out of many things that you could become in this world, right? You could become a politician, you could become a teacher, you could become a businesswoman, you could become anything. Why writing?
I guess it's because I love to read, and I think that that's what inspires most writers, is that they have books they feel very attached to as children, and they want to stay in that world of words and writing. So I think that is what motivates many people who become writers. They just fall in love with books when they're young children and want to read, and then because you want to do what you love, you want to write.
Wow. Was there anybody in the family become the influencers for you when you were little and then motivate you to, to take that path?
Both my parents did, because they had a lot of faith and confidence in me. They seemed to feel I could become anything I wanted to become. And because they kept our home filled with good books and were always, especially my mother, was always recommending books that I would read, books she had read as a child. We'd go to, in our town, our little town, which was Kalamazoo, Michigan, they would have a bookmobile. It was like a traveling truck that would come on Friday nights and set up at the school with lots of books. And we'd go over there and we'd all select the books we wanted to read that week. So they gave me a lot of confidence and inspiration, even though no one in my family had really ever been a writer. They were all teachers. People in my family were lawyers and teachers.
Lawyers and teachers.
So, yeah.
So you at one point you wanted to become an actress, right? And then you went to the stage and perform, and then for the whole life you wanted to become a writer. So not only becoming a writer, becoming an international best-selling author and travel the world, go into stage and share with the people the ideas, and it's making both become one. So very beautiful. Congratulations to you. Tell us, from that teenage, from that little girl into the university time, what did you do, and share with us a little bit more, please.
Certainly. I was primarily working, I did a lot of journalism and writing for newspapers and magazines. And even when I was a teenager, I was the correspondent for our school, our hometown newspaper's teen page, and I won a journalism prize. So it was always nonfiction that was really interesting to me. And I did lots of things, but I didn't feel like I had a specific area of interest. I wanted to write about all kinds of things. So during the 70s and 80s, I wrote on all kinds of things. I covered organized crime for some magazines. I wrote about, I wrote an advice column for younger women. These are very kind of all over the map. I wasn't focusing in one area or one field. But in the mid 80s, I began doing some work as a speechwriter for corporate.
Speechwriter?
Because a speechwriter, yeah, because at that time there were fewer and fewer magazines, and they were paying less and less. It had already started. What we've seen happen to print journalism. So I decided to switch to speechwriting just as a financial decision. Found that I really liked it, but here was what was happening to me in the mid-late 80s. As I was working as a speechwriter, it was my first real exposure to a corporate environment or to big organizations. I worked for excellent companies, but what I saw was that the companies that I was working in had no idea how to use the women who were starting to come in into the organizations. They had no idea what they could be contributing. They had no idea how to develop their talent. They had no idea how to help them gain the confidence maybe that they needed to gain in order to really make their mark. So that's what I saw, and I thought, someone has to do something about this. Someone has to do something positive. Now, at that time, there were quite a few books beginning to be written for women in organizations, because it was the 80s and they're starting to come into them. But the idea was always, and every single one of the books that were being written then were focused on how women needed to change, how they needed to adapt, how they needed to learn from men what worked and then try to copy that. And I thought this was a terrible approach. First of all, women weren't very good at pretending to be men. Secondly, organizations were beginning to change. And the changes that we began to see later in terms of organizations, the technology and the spread of ideas and the breaking down of hierarchy, those things were beginning to change organizations, but yet women were being advised to adapt to a leadership model that I felt would become increasingly obsolete. So what I decided to do, and it was basically my own idea, was to try to get a contract from a publisher on a book that looked at how some of the more successful women did things, because there were women who were in leadership positions, not many at all. But I wanted to look and see, how do they do things? Are there things they have in common? that other women could learn from. And I got the contract. I began interviewing women. Then, after a while, a lot of interviews start to sound kind of similar. So I decided that what I was going to do was focus on diary studies, that is, documenting what these women did through their day. So it could be very specific and give a real sense. It was like storytelling. Give a real sense of how they did things rather than how they said they did things. And that model was really useful in that case because people tended to be skeptical. They'd say, oh, well, she says she does that, but I'd like to see what the experience of her people is. I wanted to be in the organization and show what was being done. So that book, which was then entitled The Female Advantage, Women's Ways of Leadership, was published in 1990. And it was the first book to focus on what women had to contribute rather than how they needed to change and adapt. And I believe that because it was the first, there was nothing like that and nothing had been written like that, it became very successful and very popular and had a lot of influence. And I knew it almost from a couple days after it was published, because I started getting these letters. We got real letters through the mail in those days. I started getting these letters from women saying, this has shown me I have a leadership style, or I always thought I did things wrong because it's not the way that my father did things, but now I believe that I have something different to offer and I can be successful or a leader on my own terms. So women were feeling a tremendous amount of confirmation because of this. It was kind of ironic to me because my idea had been this book would be for organizations to help them understand what women had to contribute, but it wasn't having that impact. It was having the impact upon the women themselves in terms of their confidence. So, because that book became popular, I started getting a lot of invitations to come into organizations and speak to the women and do a program. And there was no budget for these hardly at all at that time. But I felt, well, it's a good way to sell books and I can make the book and keep the book successful if I do this. So I ended up quitting the very good job that I had doing speech writing and full-time writing on the subject, continuing writing articles and adaptations from the book, but also doing a lot of speaking. And it was the first time I'd done public speaking. I didn't really, I had to learn on my own. But it was the right thing to do. And I sort of knew in my heart that it was the right thing to do, that this was an idea and this is important for anybody who has a sense of following their own path or dream. I had the belief that this was an idea whose time had come and that it needed somebody to stand behind it, and that because I'd written this book, I was that person. So I saw it as taking responsibility for supporting what I put out in the world and stepping up and stepping out. And to that end, I worked on becoming a better speaker and then eventually started doing workshops. And my whole career pretty much unfolded from that. I'd been doing a lot of writing and various different things before that were helpful and certainly prepared me. But with that switch that I made and that idea in 1987 to do the Female Advantage, then my whole career began to have this shape. That really, it was a shape that reflected my interest, which is in the experience that people have at work, and the experience individuals have at work, and the extent to which they feel they can have fulfilling careers and reach their highest potential, and what is going to be helpful to them in that. So the Female Advantage, that kind of made the career. one of the things that I was aware of in that book is that the women often used, the women that I studied, who were women who were extraordinary leaders, they often, were very interested in including people rather than leading in a hierarchical way. So I called my next book The Web of Inclusion, which was about organizations that were good at getting sort of maximum ideas from people at every level. And that started the whole theme of inclusion. So since then, I've written in 6 more books and lots of articles and lots of programs, but they've all kind of come from that interplay between women's leadership and inclusive leadership.
Beautiful, beautiful. I want to bring you back to the 1987. Okay.
Yeah.
That is the starting of all the change, right? And you mentioned in here, in the mid 80s, that young girl Sally, innocent Sally, also put it that way, all right, came to the corporate world as a speechwriter and start to realize something is not working properly. All right.
Yes.
And back then, there's a lot of women went to work also. They also witnessed something that not working properly, but not a lot of people start to do something. So I note down in here that you said that someone had to do something, and you decided to do something. All right. So just tell me how a day looked like back then for you when you came to work and you start to realize that woman was underestimated, woman was undercontributed, and you want to make that change. Tell me.
What it looked like to me was the experience I had of very low expectations and pushback from more senior men around me, many of whom I liked and felt were very good at what they did. Let me give you an example.
Please.
I was sitting in a meeting with a very senior team. I was supporting I believe the chief financial officer. I was there to write a speech for him. So I was sitting in this meeting, and they were talking about various ideas they had to try to get, raise the company's profile and attract a pool of talent that would be broader and more informed. And I had an idea for this. It was basically an idea that I'd had because I was speaking to one of my sisters the night before, and she was a high school teacher, and in her community, a local corporation had supported some of the high school students in an initiative. So I made the suggestion, I said that I talked to my sister and she had said this, and I made the suggestion that we consider something similar. Well, first of all, I wasn't really in a position to bring that up. I was there, to support my guy, my senior executive, but it just seemed like a very good idea to me. And so I raised it in the meeting. Absolutely no one responded at all. It was as if, I didn't exist. No. No one responded. Okay. And I was surprised, but in another way, I wasn't surprised. I was the most junior person in the room. I was the only woman in the room, and I didn't really have a speaking role. I just thought I had this great idea and people would be excited by it, which they were not. So as I was walking out of the room, my boss's boss came up behind me, and he said in a really insulting tone, he said, "Well, you certainly aren't afraid to share your opinions, are you?" And trying to make me feel bad. And for whatever reason, and this was, I think, one of the most important moments in my life in terms of having a voice of my own, I responded, "No, I'm not." In other words, I didn't say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, maybe I spoke out of turn." I didn't apologize. But I wasn't defensive. I didn't say, "I have a perfect right to," no, I didn't do either of those. I just said, "No, I'm not. No, I'm not afraid to share my opinion." And he walked off like shocked and alarmed and upset. And I thought, okay, I'm going to get fired here. I've insulted, my boss's boss thinks I'm a jerk. And but that didn't happen.
Wow.
And I kind of went along, and about a month later, I overheard him in an office with a colleague saying to that person, "You know what I like about Sally is she's not afraid to say what she thinks." And I realized that I needed to help other women do that, to have the confidence that what they contributed was important enough so that if a senior person objected to it, they didn't have to take that to heart and feel terrible and, oh, I did an awful thing, or what's going to happen to me. They could just be very clear, no, this is what I think, but not at all defensive. And then wait for the person's opinion to evolve about them. So that was a big moment for me. But it also, going back to your question, describes what a day looked like.
Yeah.
It was very difficult to get any of my thoughts, what we would call now strategic ideas for the organization, for them to break through. There wasn't really a structure. The men around me were not accustomed to hearing any of these ideas from women. Yes, there were women now working in the workplace and a few even at middle management, but they were not used to women contributing strategic ideas. So that became a very important thing, and I really thank my parents and the educators I had when I was younger for having had the confidence to think, oh no, I said something awful, I made a terrible mistake, I'm sorry I offended you. That I could just be polite about it, but not back off.
So who was the boss that saying that he was proud of you, that you're not afraid to say what you think? What is his name?
What was his name? His name was Roger. He was my boss's boss. Yeah, he was my boss's boss. So I don't really even remember him that well, except for that incident, because I didn't see him that much. But his name was Roger. And, we later became, I can never say friends, but it was clear later on that he respected me. My job was very hard at that point because I'd made the decision about writing the book that became The Female Advantage. So on one hand, I was working full-time as a speechwriter, and then I was going home and trying to write this book. So it was a little tough.
Well, I think that he contributed to this journey very beautifully. He could have done, the way that many other bad leaders could have done back then, right? But then he chose to do differently. He chose to respect the idea and the right for you to say how you feel and stuff like that. And that encouraged you to start not only to continue the path, but also help other women to grow in the path also.
That's true, but he didn't at first. I mean, he really pushed back against me and found my, even suggesting this idea to be very insulting. It was just later, I think, when I had to some degree earned his respect by not backing off and by not being defensive, that he could see that I had some value. So we had to have that rather painful encounter before he began to, I would say, open up.
Wow. And I read the book, The Big Magic, from Elizabeth Gilbert, and she said that when ideas comes, and if you don't capture the idea will go away and go to somebody else, right? So the idea for you to write the book about the women and helping them to raise their voice, that brings the first success also. And another one is for you to write about inclusion, so which is truly, really, really booming when COVID-19 happened, right? So the whole world started talking about the diversity, equity, and inclusions. But 20-something years ago, you started to write about that. And that's the first book on inclusion. So tell us, how did you form up that idea?
Well, it was, this is how I came up with the idea. The name of the book that I wrote was called The Web of Inclusion. And I was having lunch with one of the women who I was doing a diary study of for the Female Advantage. I was having lunch with her. It was after the book, after the Female Advantage had been published. I was having lunch with her at her club. And in New York City clubs at that time, you could not have what they called visible paper. You couldn't have a pen and paper out. You couldn't have a newspaper. You're just supposed to only be in conversation. So she was explaining to me a little bit of the structure of her organization and how she had restructured it to not be a hierarchy. And she was explaining, and then she said, let me show you what I mean. And she started taking salt and pepper shakers and knives and forks and glasses and all the things that were on the table. And she put them into various round concentric circles with forks and spoons making connections between them. And she said, so this is kind of what the structure looks like. I want a structure where people can feel that they're part of something bigger than themselves, where they're constantly drawing in closer to the leader, and where they have relationships at various levels, and they have the possibility to do that. And I said, it looks kind of like a spider's web. And she said, oh, yeah. She said, I guess you could call it a web. And I walked away from that lunch thinking, it's a web of inclusion. So really, I got that, metaphor and that phraseology from her having made this little map of a non-hierarchical organization on a tabletop with spoons and salt and pepper. And it was a good title, and it got recognized right away. Here's what's interesting. What I meant by inclusion at that time was an organization that was good at getting strategic level ideas from people at every level. Very similar to what happened to me in the speechwriting days when I was not at a level to express a good idea and it got shot down. I was looking at organizations that had the capacity to do that, to say, wow, that's a really good idea. That came from, I remember writing about Nickelodeon in the book, The Web of Inclusion. The idea for its most popular show came from a receptionist. So that's what I was looking at. How do you get good ideas from people at every level? It had nothing to do with diversity, nothing. But about 2 years later, the book came out in 95, so about 97, organizations began for the first time having diversity initiatives.
Wow.
And they called them diversity and inclusion because they recognized that inclusion had to be part of diversity. So that really wasn't the idea in the book, but I was very fortunate to benefit from that connection, because having put the word of inclusion out there, then diversity and inclusion initiatives all began including me and my work and that book in their programs and in their training. So that was fortunate. It wasn't my idea. It is the exact right idea to pair diversity and inclusion. People often think diversity and inclusion are kind of the same thing. They're not. They're very different. Diversity means that you've got, a diverse talent pool. Diversity defines the nature or the reality of the talent pool that most organizations have to work with today. Whereas inclusion, I believe firmly, and I think this is now a fairly widespread belief, inclusion is the only really reliable means by which to lead and manage a highly diverse workforce, for the simple reason that people who come from outside the leadership mainstream are more likely to feel and to be excluded. So the whole pairing of diversity and inclusion, later they added equity to the language, it really makes absolute sense. But that's how I got into all the work on diversity, and that became a little bit of my portfolio. And of course, what was so interesting is this really started in American companies that were becoming more diverse, but now it's a worldwide phenomenon.
I wanted to congratulate you for not only starting having the courage to start something that you believe was right, but also have the strength to become the creator of something that making the move for a lot of people also. And the whole world is really onto inclusion. It needs to have somebody to start it first. So the shift was started in 1997 by you, even though back then the web the term web inclusion was not exactly what you envision it's supposed to be, but it's starting something. You see the creating, yeah. So now let's go into the newest book that you just writing. You just published, the Rising Together, because it's good for our audience to know what is that book about and why did you write the book at the beginning anyway.
Well, it's interesting because How Women Rise, which is the book that I wrote with Marshall, which had such a huge international success, that I really saw as the fulfillment of what I began thinking about with the female advantage. Whereas Rising Together, I see as the fulfillment of what I started thinking about with the web of inclusion. And Rising Together is very much a book about how we as individuals build strong relationships with people we may perceive as being very different from ourselves, and how organizations and teams can work with people to make that happen. What I believe now, as we've been talking about, I've been exposed to diversity and inclusion efforts in organizations from the very beginning, from the time they started in the mid-late 90s. And I had become increasingly convinced that we're a little bit on the wrong track with it, because so many organizations have focused on unconscious bias and identifying unconscious bias. And it seemed to me that we were overlooking the very important role of inclusive behaviors. That's how people feel included, because of how other people behave. That determines our experience, not the thoughts that are running through people's minds. So I wanted to look at how we can use the idea of inclusive behaviors to create more inclusive and thus high functioning teams, business units, organizations, and what is the role for individuals? We can't all outsource this to HR. We have to be part of this effort. So what can individuals do to build these relationships? What can organizations do to encourage that? What kinds of programs, initiatives, and trainings are going to be most useful in really making inclusion work and avoid all the kind of political pushback? And so that was the idea in Rising Together. And of course, I loved the language of rising, and it had worked so well with How Women Rise. And I began calling my Substack, my weekly newsletter, All Rise. So I wanted to stay with that language of rising, and I think it works very well. The inclusive behaviors are really specific, but also I identified something, and this goes back to the influence of Marshall Goldsmith's work on a lot of what I've done. And by the way, How Women Rise, I originally thought of as what got you here won't get you there for women, because I noticed in working with Marshall's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, was that a lot of the habits he looks at that get in people's way are not much of a problem for women, but there are a lot of issues that get in women's ways that may have served them well in the past that were not in the book. So that's why I suggested to him that we collaborate on that book, and which became, extremely successful. But that shows how his his thinking influenced mine. That whole idea that the habits and behaviors that served you well in the past may undermine you as you move forward. In Rising Together, of course, did not collaborate. It was my book alone, but I was influenced by his thinking from the book Triggers, his book, earlier book Triggers, because what I saw was that the stumbling block, if you will, with practicing inclusive behaviors is not just that we're not sure, what those behaviors are or how they would be perceived by others. It's also that we can feel triggered by things at work that make us not want to practice those behaviors. We may feel triggered by the idea that someone's getting an advantage, that it's not fair. We may be triggered because we're uncomfortable with how somebody else communicates. This happens a lot across generations, but also across ethnic and racial groups and gender. So we may be uncomfortable with that. We may be uncomfortable because we feel that we've been excluded from a network, which would really be of important value to us. So all of these things operate, and visibility, that's a big one. We may feel triggered because we feel that we are not noticed when we say something, like me in that meeting when I made the suggestion and nobody commented. We may feel triggered by our own invisibility, and that may cause us to be resentful of people who are comfortable, claiming visibility. So all those things get in our way. So Marshall's idea of, when I began to realize there's stumbling blocks, there's sort of emotional resentments we have that hold us back from acting really in our best interest, really in a way that best serves us and our organizations. So I used Marshall's language of triggers there. And I think that's a really important part of it, because those are the conversations we don't have. Yeah. We don't have the conversations about why I resent so-and-so because they're in this network and I'm not in this network, and I feel like I'll never be able to, fulfill my talents because I'm excluded from that. So we don't talk about that, and I think it's important to do so.
So the next question is not going to be fair for you, but I need to ask this question. If you have to pick one chapter in that book, Rising Together, that you really like to share with our audience, what would that chapter be and why?
I think it would be the chapter where I describe the triggers. I've got 8 triggers, so I have 8 chapters that describe those triggers. But the big chapter at the beginning, where I talk about what gets in our way, and try to talk about it in a very honest and real way that's really grounded in reality. What kind of resentments hold us back? How triggers operate? Why they're emotional responses, how they lie outside our control. They do not lie within our control, but how our response does lie within our control. And also in that chapter, I introduced the kernel of an idea that I've been working with since the book came out in workshops. By the way, I did my first big workshop in Singapore on this last year. And the idea is that what holds us back with these triggers is not so much what happened or even the emotional response, but the story we tell ourselves to explain our emotional response. For example, on the visibility, we may tell ourselves, we feel uncomfortable in a meeting, but somebody else seems to be very comfortable and get all the praise and all the recognition. So what do? We often tell ourselves, well, that person's a showboat, or, they're arrogant. They're very all about themselves. I'm not that kind of person. I'm a more appropriate, modest, and humble person. So we tell ourselves this story, and then it's that story that keeps us stuck. And so one of the things I realized, I talk about it a bit in this big chapter on triggers in Rising Together, is the best thing to do is to rewrite the story and
Rewrite.
write a story, in a positive way that gives the other person the benefit of our goodwill, not the benefit of our doubt, but the benefit of our goodwill. And even if we don't believe it, even if we believe that really we're being disrespected, even if we believe really that that other person is a showboat or is somebody who is trying to grab all the attention for themselves, even if we believe that, if we can rewrite that story in a more positive way, oh, they probably, reframed what I said, not because they're trying to steal my idea, but because they wanted to make sure other people heard it, or they thought it was such a good idea, it bore repeating. And just telling that kind of story, why is that important? It's important because it gives us a path to action.
Yeah.
It gives us the ability to act in a different way. If we're telling ourselves the negative story, we don't have a path to action. All we can do is feel resentful. Maybe our action will be to grab a coworker who we think may agree with us and complain about it. That's not a very positive, that's a path to action, but it's a negative action. So really, by doing that, then we have a path to positive action. We can, go to that person afterwards and say, oh, I'm really glad you echoed my idea in that meeting. Thank you. Maybe it's something we could work on together and make a presentation to the unit about what we're talking about. So it gives you ways to act positively, and that's what I really think is most important, is getting out of our heads, getting out of attitudes of negativity, even when we feel we deserve to feel resentful or negative about something, so we can take a positive action. If we're able to take that kind of positive action, we have the chance to turn somebody who may have been an adversary into an ally.
Yeah.
And even if we don't, just that demonstration of our goodwill is a very positive thing.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter how other people could be. We can always be the one that we would want us to be, right? Ourselves to be. And imagine if the world people can have that superpower to reframe the story, reframe the idea, rewrite it in a positive way. How one can treat another in this world is going to be changing so significantly. So I think that that's the rising together is going to be another superpower tool that can help people to go to the next level where we can truly work together. Because the world over the years had been promoting for individualism for so long, and it needs a lot of, antidotes to help people to get out of that and start to see, yes. I have 3 last questions, actually 4 last questions for you, but let's start by the one important one first. My wife and I, we've been travel and interview a lot of people and asking them how amazing people think, because we believe that if we can help people to improve their ability to think by simply asking amazing people like you the secret of thinking and how you expand the thinking so other people can learn and apply in their life, that can help them to start the change in a positive way. So Sally, I'm asking you this question: how have you been growing your ability to think?
I've been growing my ability to think in 2 ways. One is by expanding the reading I do, and I do very wide reading, and so that's always keeps my ideas stimulated. Again, as a writer, you're stimulated by books, but also by talking to colleagues and people I work with, and really trying to ask them questions about issues that I'm dealing with in my work or that I see people dealing with in their work, and how do you handle it, and what have you had success with, and trying to keep these conversations very, very positive, staying away from the kind of conversations where you're lamenting things or, oh, people today just don't, or whatever, trying to stay on very positive conversations and be curious about the experiences my colleagues are having.
Beautiful, beautiful. The next question is about the past again, but now you travel down to the past to see yourself. Okay, so there will be 2 points in life that I want to carry back. The first point is when the little Sally first picked the book that inspired her to become a writer. Okay, so if you had the chance to talk to that Sally, little girl, what message would you talk to her?
It would be to have faith and confidence in yourself, number one, but also to find a really powerful way and a concise way to articulate what it is you want to contribute. I think that's one of the things we can all benefit from, is having a real, very firm sense of what is the specific thing we are trying to contribute to the world. And the way I kept thinking of it was, I want to be a writer. Okay, that's fine. But that doesn't let anybody know what I'm trying to contribute, how I'm trying to change the world. And I would have said, start thinking about that early so you can be clear about it.
Beautiful. So the next one is when you're in that ballroom and the leader, Roger, ignore your idea and everybody ignore your idea. So if you had a chance to talk to yourself at that moment, and what message would you tell to that Sally?
I would say, don't be defensive.
Don't be offensive.
Which I wasn't. And don't feel insulted, but don't apologize. You didn't do anything wrong. I think that what amazes me is that at that moment, and I guess I was 35 or something, that somehow it just came out of me to say, no, I'm not afraid to say what I think, in a perfectly nice, normal way. So what I would say is, good response. Stay with that. Stay with that kind of response. Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. I know the time is coming to the end. So the last question is, I want to do it quick. Okay. So it's not fair if I don't take you to the future, Sally, because we travel time in the past, the present. You need to go to the future a little bit. So you are the person who always create big things for you to do. So what is the next big thing you are about to do, you want to share with me and the audience so we can celebrate with you in advance?
Yes, the next big thing I want to do is to write a memoir, because I feel that I have seen so much, I've witnessed so much change. I've been sort of had a front row seat on the evolution of these two very important areas in the world. Of women's leadership and inclusive leadership. So I want to talk about what I saw and how I got to where I was, and the amazing people that I met along the way. So this is the time in my life to sit back and reflect and bring those memories back, and to write about them in a way that's going to be helpful to other people.
Beautiful. And a lot of people will need to read that book, so that, because we all have our journey, our role, our path, right? We met a lot of other people also, but how we can make a story out of that, how we make sense of things happen around, that's beautiful. So thanks, Sally, thanks a lot for being so nice and joining and share your stories. And I learned a lot today. I know that our audience will be benefiting a lot from listening to this conversation. I thank you for being so courageous to show up when it's needed, to stand up for what you believe, and to help people to have that belief for themselves, have that believe that they matter. And not only women, of course, men also needed that, that also. So thanks a lot. I look forward to one day we're gonna be able to see you. I will give you a big hug, and that would be fantastic. Okay.
See you in Vietnam.
Thank you in Vietnam. See you in America. See you in somewhere. We travel a lot also, so we will see you somewhere. Okay.
Beautiful.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
I love you. Bye.
Thank you. I love you too.
Bye.